There we go. We are live. Hello, folks. Now, George, typically we take a few minutes and kind of welcome people and give them a moment to join in before we launch into the recorded portion, like what becomes the actual podcast audio. So, right now we see that we got one person watching. Wow.
Oh, boy.
Yes. Woohoo.
Welcome. Thank you for showing up early.
We'll get a few more. I'm sure that'll show up. But folks that are just joining, we're going to do an interview today with George Harris, and we'll talk about who George is and do a little intro of him, and it'll be a good time. It'll be a show today. So I've noticed with this program we use, George, that there is a bit of a delay, it seems, before, like from when we hit the button to when it finally sends out a notification to everybody. So it'll be a moment or two before we start really seeing them come in. Hello, right. Logan. Thanks for joining. Awesome. So, folks, George, by the way, is also going to be a guest with us on our Guardian Nation live broadcast, I believe on the 30th. Is that what you recall, George?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be in the evening, and that, of course, is for our Guardian Nation members only. But it's a great opportunity. In fact, it's never too late to consider joining Guardian Nation. And in fact, that'll be mentioned in the recorded show today, but a special link if people want to, if you just need a little bit of a push, and even if you want to just take advantage of a 14-day free trial and join with us in that live broadcast on the 30th. That always we're consistent about when those go live. They go live at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be 9 p.m. Eastern.
That's past my bedtime. Come on.
Yeah. But we promise we won't keep you up too late.
All right. Well, once you get me talking, you can't shut me up. So you'll have to get the what do they used to have, the goat hook or whatever, and grab them off the stage.
Right.
You'll just have to hang up on me.
But anyway, folks, if you would like to join with us again, I think you're going to enjoy today's podcast episode. And if you just didn't get enough of George, well, come on back for the GN Live event on April 30th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And again, feel free to try a 14-day free trial of Guardian Nation. You can go to concealedcarry.com/14DAY, 14-day. If you just need that little bit of a push to give it a shot, take a look and see if you like what Guardian Nation membership has to offer. So, well, I think I got a few more coming in. I know there's going to be more because there always is. But I think we're going to go ahead and kick off the recorded portion of the audio show now at this point. And thank you, Logan and Cammie and Triss and David, all for being here and commenting. Guys, don't forget to like, comment, and share today's episode. I know we're going to get into some excellent topics, some really good stuff with George. So let's do it. So the way this is going to go, I'm going to count down from 3, and we're going to begin the recorded portion of the show, and away we go. We'll see where we end up. So in 3, 2, 1, this is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 410. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman. And today I'm joined by a special guest, and we'll introduce him formally here in a moment. But George, why don't you tell everybody hello? This is George Harris.
How do you do, everybody? Glad to have all of you on board with us. Hopefully we'll put something out that'll make your life more meaningful and make you shoot a little bit better.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's it's a mission that I'm on. I'm always trying to get better, and I know many of our viewers and listeners are also passionate about the subject of shooting. So we're going to talk about a lot of these things here today on this episode with George Harris of International Firearms Consultants, and also one of the original founders of Sig Sauer Academy. I guess Sig Arms Academy at the time.
That's correct.
Yeah. So lots we're going to cover in today's episode. Today's episode is sponsored and brought to you by Guardian Nation. You've heard it before. Many of you are probably sick of hearing about Guardian Nation, but you know what? We're really proud of the fact that this is I think the best and one of the fastest growing pro gun, pro concealed carry, pro shooting organizations out there. And this is the special place that our members get to interact, mingle, and learn. We've got our Guardian Nation members only Facebook group. We do these monthly live broadcasts with industry experts and professionals. And in fact, George Harris, our guest on the podcast today, will be this next upcoming Guardian Nation live guest, which is on April 30th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And so really, I'm super excited to get together again with you, George, and do that special broadcast that is only put out there to our members. But guys, if you're welcome to learn more about Guardian Nation at guardiannation.com. But if you need just a little bit of a push, you know what? We don't really advertise it that much, except for on the podcast. But if you need a little push, consider joining Guardian Nation and checking it out in a 14-day free trial. No commitment. Just sign up, 14-day free. And you can be part of that GN Live broadcast next week. And you can check out and take advantage of all the other amazing benefits of membership. And that is found at concealedcarry.com/14-day, 14DAY. So let's get into it now with George. And George, you're with your company is International Firearms Consultants.
Correct.
Again, we mentioned you're one of the co-founders of Sig Arms Academy, which now is known as Sig Sauer Academy, which I've had the pleasure of attending, and is a fine training establishment. And,
wonderful place.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and it's in a beautiful place too. Although in February, I would say it was still beautiful, but a little cold when I last attended there.
Yeah, a little chilly. I live 4 miles as the crow flies from the academy. I'm sitting there as we speak, and we had snow here yesterday, so
yeah,
it hasn't warmed up yet.
Yeah, well, even though I'm in Denver and it's relatively mild, Denver is a roller coaster ride of weather, ups and downs, and I'm sure we'll see more snow before the summer is truly here as well. So.
Oh yeah, I'm well familiar with that area as well.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, I kind of look at Sig Sauer Academy as like the mecca of gun training and gun stuff. I mean, one, there's a lot of history in the area there, just relating to the Second Amendment in general. I mean, we go back to the foundations of our country.
Sure.
And of course, there's Sig Sauer, the Sig Sauer, the American base of operations, and the academy and the pro shop and everything that's there. It's like Disney World for gun enthusiasts and trainer, people that want to train. So, George, tell us kind of how did that sort of opportunity even come to you? Like, what's the beginnings in the industry for you personally, and how did you get to that point?
Real interesting. Oh geez, I went in the military in 1970. Was an infantry soldier, small arms armor, and was I guess a big mouth at the time. So they decided they needed somebody to go to drill corporal and then drill sergeant school. So I became a drill instructor in 72. And since I was a shooter, I grew up with this unhealthy love of firearms. It's just if it had a trigger and a muzzle, I was all over it. So I started teaching the basic rifle marksmanship course, and that was kind of my thing. I was a pretty good shooter, so I got picked up on some of the competitive teams, and at region level, I was shooting against a fellow by the name of Bank Miller, who was also in the military at that point in time. And Bank was a guy that was giving me a lot of trouble. I was a pretty good hardball shooter, and was one of the top shooters of my class at that point in time. And Bank was about the only person that was beating me in the matches that we shot. And so I decided I was going to go meet this guy and see if I couldn't break his index finger and eliminate the competition. But Bank turned out to be a person that I will tell you today, if you don't like Bank Miller, you're a social misfit in my mind. So anyhow, Bank and I became great friends. And over the years, from a military standpoint and otherwise, Bank and I would lose contact with one another, and then we'd come back in contact, and back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And he got an opportunity to start a military training program in 1988, 89 timeframe. And he asked me if I would work with him and help him with this program. And so we did. In 9 months, we put a program together for the 310th TACOM that allowed us to be the top combat team in the reserve program, and we were second only to the 82nd Airborne folks at All Army. And we saw that we had some talent at that point in time with Bank and I working together. Simultaneously, Ted Rowe, who was the president of SIG, was working with Bank. Now, Bank's civilian job was Chief Firearms Instructor for the Drug Enforcement Administration. So naturally, in the late 80s, everybody in the gun business was trying to transition the law enforcement community in particular from revolvers to semi-autos.
No, looks like
So Liz,
yeah, you froze there on us for just a moment.
okay, yeah,
you were just starting to talk about transitioning from revolvers to semi-autos.
Okay. All right, well, we'll go back to that. Anyhow, so Bank was Chief Firearms Instructor for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Was interested in getting SIG involved, and Ted was kind of an innovator and a pretty smart guy at that point in time. He realized that training had to accompany transition from revolvers to handguns or to pistols, and the idea was to provide armorers training, transition training, and that basically is a handling type course. The armorers course was maintaining, troubleshooting, and repairing. And then for the larger agencies to put together an instructor program so that their instructors could be trained to do the transition for their respective agencies. So since I had a training background militarily, Bank had a training background as well, from the federal standpoint, we were natural shoe-ins. And for a brief period of time, we had a fellow by the name of Jim Fry, who was also one of our military folks that came and helped us with the administrative end of things. And like I say, he was there for a brief period of time, but he was one of the military folks that helped us out as well. Yeah. So anyhow, Bank and I were given the responsibility of putting together the training programs. We did that, and then we started to expand into other areas of law enforcement military type training. Eventually, the administration at SIG changed, and we ended up having to go from a cost center to a profit center, which meant we needed to make money. Right. And we had to find a way to add additional classes and that kind of stuff to the till. So we opened it up to the commercial, the civilian market. We had a real brainstorm with getting women involved. And I think we were probably the first major organization to get to specifically get women involved doing women's only courses, in that category. And my wife, Linda, was the first female firearms instructor at the Sig Academy. And in fact, I should say my late wife at this point. She passed away in 2018. But with the USCCA, we have established a Linda Harris Scholarship Fund for female firearms instructors, and in an effort to get more women involved in shooting sports, and personal defense. And that's in memory of her and the trailblazing she did at SIG. So long story short, Bank and I were friends from the early 70s, and, things just kind of worked out that we had an opportunity to get together and to put something together. We knew we both worked well together, which we still do. And, the SIG Academy, or Sig Arms Academy at that point in time, was born from there. So,
yeah. Well, that's quite a story, and it's obviously a legacy that lives on, because whereas other manufacturers that have even had their own academies and training schools and whatnot, a lot of those have come and gone, and Sig Sauer Academy is still here.
Yeah, we watched Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson was the premier academy, and they, at that point in time, they were the leaders of the pack, and, corporate decision making and all kinds of different things have caused them to essentially go away. And of course, H&K, John Meyer and his company, were spawned off of H&K with his with Team One, but they had a great group of guys that really knew what they were doing. And the Glock folks have been kind of in it for a while, but never to the degree that the H&K folks or the Smith & Wesson folks, and Beretta's pretty much the same way. They've had an interest, but not a whole lot going on. Yep. So today SIG is the is the top of the rock.
That's right.
The facility, the instructors, the company. What's not to like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Thanks for sharing that history with us. Now, George, I as is typical when I have someone on the podcast, I tend to do a little bit of research and stumbled upon a few articles that you've written. Now, you've been published a lot of places, magazines and online and various websites. And so one thing that I came across was an article talking, it's actually speaking of USCCA, on the USCCA's website, talking about the wall drill.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's the wall drill? So I read that and was like, quite intrigued, because I think some of the content there and what you're, kind of the whole point of that is really well geared towards what the situation we find people in currently with this whole COVID-19 outbreak, and people being kind of hunkered down in their homes, probably more than is typical. And so, and here at concealedcarry.com, we've been encouraging a lot of people to do dry fire. Take advantage of this downtime or whatever, wherever you are, and even if you're still busy working or whatever, still dry fire is a great tool. So, would you walk us through the wall drill, the concepts behind that, and kind of explain that for our viewers and listeners here?
Sure. First thing I want to say is the wall drill can be seen on online. Downrange TV probably has the best version of it. It's about 20 years old. You'll see a George Harris with much younger and better looking. But at any rate, that's, I don't know, probably 3.5, 4 minutes of really the best description. And that was done right out of the back pocket. Michael Bain showed up at the academy one day and said, let's do something different. And I said, fine. what do you want to do? He says, well, I want to just video you doing, one of your drills, your favorite drill or whatever. And I said, okay. And he says, how long will it take you to get ready? I says, where's the camera? And he said, well, they're outside getting ready. I said, as soon as you can get them in here, I'm ready. He says, well, don't you have to, get some guns or do something? I said, nope, bring them in here. Let's go. And we did that when no takes, right out of the back pocket. Boom, that was it. And honestly, I think that's probably the best video that I ever did describing the wall drill. The other one is my last day in the military uniform. I stayed in the reserve program after active duty until they threw me out when I turned 60, which was August of 2010. So, yeah, I'm that old. But anyhow, they wanted to get some shots of me, with some of the stuff that I had taught the international team. And at that point in time, we had 5 international championships under our belt with the Army Reserve Combat Team. And the techniques that we used were all simple. They all worked, and they were easy to do. So they asked me to, film those. So you'll see the wall drill, followed up by the bullet hole drill, the reset drill, the now drill, several other things that you can pick up on some of the YouTube channels. But at any rate, the wall drill was a cure to a problem that I had. And that problem is that I found that this is very common for a lot of shooters. As I was pulling the trigger, my eye focus was leaving the sights and going downrange towards the target. And even though I was a pretty darn good shooter, I knew that I could do better than what I was doing. And then I found out that the target was in focus about the time that the gun went off, and I knew that really wasn't what we were trying to do. So I tried to make myself stay on the sights, but I had done this for so long that I'd created a habit that I literally couldn't will myself to stay on the sights through the release of the shot from the barrel. So being the hard-headed, stubborn guy that I am, I decided, okay, we will force this issue. And if I have a wall in the way, right at the front sight, right at the muzzle of the gun, my eye can't transition downrange. And when I first started doing that, my eyes actually hurt. I physically had pain in my eyes because they were conditioned that as my hand moved or my trigger finger moved the trigger, my eye wanted to move away from the sights. So at any rate, I forced the issue, and my precision marksmanship got better because I stayed on the sights through the release of the shot. So the idea here originally with the wall drill was just to keep my eyes on the front sight until the hammer fell. And what I also found is that with the wall in the way and me looking at the front sight, I found that the front sight, in some cases, depending on how I manipulated the trigger, would move in the rear sight notch ever so slightly when the hammer fell. Well, you and I both know that means that the muzzle was also moving slightly as opposed to the target. And of course, the further you were away from the target, geometrically speaking, the further the shot was off center. So I learned that in some cases, my trigger finger wasn't doing the perfect job of moving the trigger parallel to the frame. I also learned that my fingers, my little finger in particular, after my hand got tired, when I was moving the index finger, would start to tighten up and would cause the gun to move a little bit. And I started to learn that my grip was changing ever so slightly with one hand or with two hands. So what that helped me to do was diagnose these little deficiencies that I had no idea that I was doing, and and achieve the ultimate goal of being able to pull the trigger with my eye focus on the front sight. And when the hammer hit the firing pin or the striker released or whatever took place to fire the gun, nothing changed with the gun. So there was no added movement whatsoever that would cause the front sight to move out of literally as perfect as I could make the alignment with the rear sight. So I did this right-handed only, left-handed only. I did it two hands, both sides. I even did it upside down. And you know, some people have seen me. I think I'm on film somewhere. I don't even know where it is now. Standing on one foot, shooting the gun left-handed upside down, pat myself on the head with the other hand, or rubbing my belly or whatever with the other hand, and shooting a really nice group at 10, 15 yards. And the point with all that is to prove that all you got to do is to stabilize the muzzle on the target and operate the trigger without changing that stability, and you will shoot as good as the gun is going to shoot with the ammunition that you're shooting in it.
Yeah, that's that's a theme that has come up on this show many a times from a variety of shooters and folks we've interviewed. Because it's the truth. I just have a grip module here that I'm holding, of a P320, but if that thing is on target when the trigger goes bang, I mean, guess where the bullet's going,
Right. Well, one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm, introducing the shooting course, and I don't care who I'm talking to, whether it's, ranked beginners that never touched a gun or people that have been professional shooters all their lives, is the simplicity of shooting. And, there are two things that you need to be concerned with when you're working with firearms. Number one, safety. And number two is success. And we define safety as going home with the same amount of holes you left home with. And success is hitting the target. The objective of shooting is hitting the target, right? So you can achieve both those with just two things. And most anybody, don't care who you are, can remember two things. And that's muzzle management and trigger finger discipline. And to carry those a little further, when we talk about point the muzzle in a safe direction, that means from the time you encounter the gun until the time you put it away, you always need to be aware of where the muzzle is pointing. The safe direction is any direction in which, should the gun fire, no personal injury and minimal property damage would occur. Simple.
Yep.
You go home with the same amount of holes you left home with. From a success standpoint, if the muzzle's pointing at the target when the bullet comes out, will you or will you not hit the target?
Yeah.
Not hard to figure that one out, right? Yeah. So easy on the muzzle management end of things, and on the trigger finger discipline end of things, which is the second part of it, is no gun just jumps up and starts barking bullets by itself. So if you don't put your finger on the trigger, you don't have to worry about the gun going off, period. If you want to hit something, you need to stabilize the muzzle on the target. And notice I didn't say hold motionless. I just said stabilize, which means hold it as still as you can, and operate the trigger without affecting that stability. And that's where the wall drill comes in. Because if you're having trouble hitting a target, unload the gun, go find a vertical surface. It could be the target you're shooting at if you just walk down range, and do some wall drill stuff. Look at your front sight every time the hammer, the trigger releases the hammer or the striker, and you'll see what's going on. It ain't rocket science. Very easy to diagnose, what you're doing. Yep. So going back to square one, muzzle management, trigger finger discipline will give you safety and success. And if you can give that to anybody, there are only two things to remember. you've given a person something that makes sense, that's not arguable, and will help keep them safe and relatively successful. And that's, we need safe and successful people in our business.
Yeah. You mentioned something there that I really identify with when you're talking about safety, right? And that was, you talked about being aware of the muzzle of your gun and where it's pointed, because we actually crafted, I mean, they're based on the classic 3 or 4 firearm safety rules that everybody's familiar with, but we made some tweaks to them. And one of the rules, that rule number 1, has to do with, we added the words being aware of the muzzle of the gun, being aware of what you're doing with the gun, because that's what I think is probably the biggest failure, safety-wise, that people make with a gun. They forget that they have a gun in their hands, or what they're doing with it, or where it's pointed. They're focused on something else. They're thinking about this or that, what they're going to have for dinner tonight, or whatever it is, and
Yep.
they've lost awareness of where that muzzle's pointing.
Yeah, easy to have what I call cranial vacuumitis. Just you
Right.
lose your mind there just for a second thinking about something else. I'd like to emphasize the fact that the only dangerous part of the gun is the muzzle.
Yep.
And that's where the bullet comes out, and that's where all the business is done. And I also like to emphasize the point that, the gun's stored somewhere. Let's say it's in a gun vault. Well, when you touch the gun, you need to be aware of where the gun's pointed. And then when you take it out of the vault, either put it in the case, in the holster, or whatever it is that you put it into, you need to be aware of the muzzle. And then when you take it from the room that it's in to the car, let's say you're going to go to the range, well, where is your muzzle pointed? Where is your muzzle pointed in the car? Where is your muzzle pointed when it comes out of the car? It goes on and on and on. And, the awareness is something that needs to be at the peak of your consciousness at all times.
Yep. Now, speaking of precision, right, or of, we spent a little bit of time here talking about, if that muzzle is pointing at the target,
Yep.
the muzzle is square to the target,
Yep.
perfectly aligned.
Yep.
That trigger is pressed in such a way that it doesn't disturb that.
Yep.
You don't input any additional, tweaks, creaks, twists, whatever of
Yep.
your hands, arms, wrists.
Yep.
That bullet's going to go there. A little while back, I did some math. Believe it or not, I did some math.
Oh boy.
I
got to take my shoes off to do much math.
I like math, okay, but I heard this thing, and I've heard it mentioned a couple of times, and it had to do with, well, a 1/16 inch deviation in your sights will translate to 4 inches at 25 yards of either hitting or you're missing by 4 inches, and I'm like, well, that can only be true based on a certain sight radius. So I had to do some calculation and figure out, where that, oh wait, not 25 yards. I think it was at 7 yards. I think that's 7 yards. So quarter inch, or not a quarter inch, 16th inch deviation in your sight alignment, 7 yards translates to about 4 inches. That's true in a gun with a sight radius of about a J-frame revolver.
Yep.
But coincidentally, what that amounts to is it's a little bit less than a degree, 1 full degree of deviation in that alignment.
Okay.
1 degree is about 4.6 inches. 1 degree deviation in your alignment of a gun is about 4.6 inches at 7 yards. Okay. That's pretty substantial, right? Like, if you think about it, you go like 1 degree, that's not very much. But 1 degree could be the difference between hitting and not hitting.
That's true.
So in another article of yours that you wrote, you're talking about the importance of precision. And it's actually an article I'll reference from Action Target. And by the way, for folks on the podcast, everything I'm talking about here today, this USCCA article we talked about, this one that I'm talking about now with George, those links will be in the notes or description of this episode. But precision shooting is, you actually said something in there. You said precision shooting is a total mystery to some simply because they are confused about what they must see to consistently hit the target.
That's correct.
And I thought that was really insightful. There's a lot of there's a lot of depth in a statement like that. Precision shooting, a mystery to some because they're confused about what they must see to consistently hit the target. So a couple things here. I'm going to throw some questions at you and then let you run away with it.
Oh, I
Number
can't
one,
let her rip.
number one, why, particularly, even in a defensive context, why is precision important? Why is it important that we master the fundamentals in such a way that we can shoot with precision? And two, what do we need to see, and what do we need to not be confused about? In other words, to kind of answer this statement that you made here, so that we can consistently hit the target.
Okay, so let's take number one first. About the precision end of things. Precision is literally being able to hit the target, whatever the target is. So let's take a combat type situation. If you look at the upper center mass of the human, you're talking about maybe an 8-inch circle or whatever. So let's say an 8-inch paper plate, right? For discussion purposes, that gives us something that we can use as a cardboard target, and gives us an idea as to what we need to be able to hit. All right, so we need to be able to hit that under all circumstances. It could be shooting while moving, could be shooting at distance, it could be shooting in low light, it could be shooting with one hand or the offhand, all the combinations. But all of your shots have to be precise enough to hit that plate. So, what a lot of people think is, precision is shooting every shot in the same hole, and that's good. And that's good if you can do that. But, when you add all the other factors in, precision is being able to put the shots where you want to, when you need to. So if you can hit that 8-inch plate, that 8-inch area of somebody's chest that's trying to kill you, you've got enough precision. So if we in a static situation, in other words, when we are on the range just practicing, if we can shoot with very tight, acute precision, in other words, shoot every shot in the same hole at whatever distance, do you think if you could do that, that would enhance your ability when other factors are thrown into the mix? And the answer is, of course, yes.
Right.
I don't think anybody will argue with me that trigger control is the name of the game. And that's what causes us to move the gun off the target. As we were talking with the wall drill earlier, improper trigger finger placement on the trigger, or changing your grip or increasing grip tension as your trigger finger is moving, that all moves the muzzle off the target. And as you stated, the further you were away from the target, the greater the shot differential from the center of the target to the side, or wherever it's not supposed to go.
Right.
So that's the thing that we need to think about. How precise do we need to be? Now, the other part of it is when we are working on precision and sight alignment, we need to understand why sight alignment is important and why I focus on the sights is important. And we need to understand literally what we need to see in order for it to make sense. And if it makes sense, we'll do it. Okay, so the reason we align the sights is, as you referred to earlier, is to get the muzzle square to the target. All right, that's the reason that sight alignment is important. Mm-hmm. It literally squares the muzzle up. And if your front sight moves left, right, upward, or downward, that means that the angle of the muzzle to the target is no longer perpendicular. Okay, so does that make sense?
Yep.
So,
as a former carpenter, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're all right. So, exactly. So the idea here is to get the muzzle absolutely 100% perpendicular to the target. If we let the eye do what it naturally does, and the eye will naturally center the front sight and the rear sight notch, um, literally we just superimpose that sight alignment over the target, which equates to sight picture. And if we can move the trigger without changing that sight alignment, we're exactly where we need to be. So one of the things that we need to understand, and this is a nice little tidbit that helps the shooter to self-diagnose, is look at the front sight and see the front sight. Now, from a defensive standpoint, which is what I do more of than a lot of other things, I like to have a dot in the front sight, like a night sight or whatever. And as I look through the window, keyword being window, as I look through the window of the rear sight notch, the eye will automatically center the dot in that notch, horizontally as well as vertically. I superimpose that dot over top of whatever it is that I want to hit. Now, to deviate here just for a minute, most everybody is familiar with red dot sights on rifles, and now on pistols, you put the dot on it and shoot it. All right. So you use the front sight dot as you would the red dot. The only thing you've got to do is to view it through the rear sight notch or the rear sight window. And you put the dot on it, whatever it is you want to shoot, and pull the trigger. So how do you know your eye focus is on the front sight? That's number one. And how do you know your eyes are even open? Because I'm going to tell you, more than 50% of the shooters that if you were to observe them, when they pull the trigger, they shut their eyes when the gun goes off. So let's go back to proving whether your eyes are open or not, and whether they're focused on the front sight or not. And you don't need to tell me. You can lie to yourself if you want to, but that doesn't do you any good. So what takes place when the bullet exits the muzzle? What follows that bullet right out of the muzzle? What do you think? You tell me.
Well, what follows the bullet would be some pressure, some gas.
There you go.
And then of course we have recoil, the opposite reaction of all that's occurring, that starts to move everything up and back.
Yeah, we don't care about the recoil right now, but I'm going to tell you, and you hit it right on the head. And I refer to it as smoke, flash, and blast, or some sort of atmospheric disturbance. All right. So when we see that from the side, when somebody else is shooting, we'll notice that that smoke, flash, and blast comes out in a plume type shape, and certainly covers the front sight. So if your eye focus were on the front sight, do you think it would be reasonable to expect you to be able to see that smoke, flash, and blast, that atmospheric disturbance when the bullet exits? And the answer is yes. You see it every time, or it happens every time, and you will see it if your eyes are focused on the front sight and your eyes are open. When we go back to semi-automatic pistols, there's one other thing that gives us a little bit of a clue, and it happens every time. We just talked about seeing the front sight through the rear sight notch, correct?
Right.
All right. So there's this hole in the slide that something comes out of that's between the front sight and the rear sight. And every time we pull the trigger, something comes out of that hole. It happens every time. Not arguable. And if you're not seeing it, your eyes are shut when you pull the trigger.
Yep.
How about that?
Yeah, I agree. That's a great test. I mean, because you either see it or you don't, right?
Exactly.
And I talk about it sometimes, just talking about, like, I want to see the exact moment. I mean, we're talking about the millisecond that I see that front sight go bloop and jump up. Because if I see that, it tells me a couple of things. One, it tells me the exact alignment of where that was at the moment the bullet left the muzzle. And then it tells me that that my eyes are open, that I am seeing what's going on, right? So it tells me, like, that's the beginning of understanding how to even, sometimes people talk about the idea of calling your shots,
Sure.
knowing, like, it's not just I think my bullet went there, it's I know where that went. I don't have to even see the target
Exactly.
because I know where my sights were at the exact moment that it went bang.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you think about this for a second, we talk about follow through in any eye hand coordinated sport, baseball, golf. You could go on forever. Um, Follow through is necessary until you see the flash. And when do you see the flash? Well, that's when the bullet just left the muzzle. Gun hasn't even started to recoil yet.
Right.
So the once the bullet has lost contact with the muzzle, it's on its way, and it's nothing you can do about it. Whether it's a good shot, bad shot, or mediocre shot, doesn't make any difference. Once that bullet loses contact with the gun, it's out of your control.
That's right.
Then you can go right to work, on your next shot. It's arguable, with a lot of people as to what your reset is and your follow through is and all that. I can bore you with all the details, but literally, once you see the flash, once you recognize the flash and the brass coming out of the gun, it's time to get the muzzle back on the target, reset the trigger and get ready to shoot the next shot.
Yeah. In other words, what we might refer to as a recovery of that shot. Or recovering of the, I want to come back to where I started from is the way I think of it.
And that's a real good way of putting it, because your body will let you come right back to where you started from if you don't force it. And, over the years, I can't tell you how many people I've seen, they shoot the shot and then they force the gun back to the target, and then they have to bring the gun up to get it back on the target. Right. Well, that's wasted motion. You went all the way past the target. Now you got to bring the gun back up on the target, find the sights, find the target, put the two of them together, and then pull the trigger. My God, I could time you with a sundial, doing that kind of stuff. If you let your body, and this is one of the things that I've been very successful with. If you just let your body do what comes naturally, you will be as successful as you possibly can be. So when you interfere with your natural ability, that slows you down and decreases performance.
One of the things that can be challenging for some shooters is, once they start mastering the basics of what we're talking about here, right? Seeing the sights superimposed on target, not disturbing the muzzle as I'm pressing that trigger. They might find success in that at a slower rate of fire, right? More of a precision based. I'm just trying to hit bullseyes here, so I'm whether that's one shot a second or one shot every 5 seconds. But when we start picking up the pace, again, maybe this is the Concealed Carry Podcast, so there's a lot of what we do here that is very defensive oriented.
Yep.
What insights do you have about being able to continue, successfully, as far as applying those fundamentals, as far as maintaining focus, right, on what's important there. In other words, the alignment of the gun, and seeing that on the target. How can we start, speeding things up? In other words,
have a plan. So what the plan is you shoot the shot, you see the flash, smoke flash and blast. As the muzzle rises, you should be releasing the trigger to the reset point. At the peak of the upward movement of the muzzle, you should have reset the trigger. And as the gun settles back to its original location, now notice how I said that, as the gun settles back to its original location, that's letting the gun settle. That's not forcing it back. As the gun settles back to its original location, you have taken up the slack on the trigger and started trigger pressure so that when the front sight comes back to the center of the target, or the proper position on the target for what your eye sees, the gun should fire. So as the gun's going up, you're releasing the trigger forward, and as the gun's coming down, you're pulling the trigger to the rear. Not everybody can be Jerry Micklick or
Sure.
Any of these other folks. You can only shoot as fast as you can hit. But if you look at speed being the economy of motion, that came from Mike Plaxco back in the Stone Age sometime.
Right.
Speed is economy of motion. So if you don't use any extra errant movements, you're as fast as you're going to be.
Yep.
And the same thing with your thought processes. We could get into the mental aspects, we can get into the visual aspects, we can get into the biomechanical aspects, and we can get into the combination of all three of those blended together.
Yeah.
So, matter of fact, I'm writing a book for USCCA that if I ever get this thing done, we'll have all that information in it. So, maybe we'll have it in print one of these days before I decide to just cash in my chips entirely.
Yeah, that's great, man. I wish you the best luck in writing that book. I can only imagine the dedication it requires.
Well, with this coronavirus and all these other things, and all the other distractions have been going on. It's like marching in bubblegum, but I'm getting there. It'll get done. So it's just a matter of time.
I appreciate what you said about the gun settling, right? Letting the gun settle. Is that the same thing? What you're getting at there, as far as when that next shot is sent towards the target, would that be kind of the same thing as saying that you're letting? I mean, really, what you should be letting or doing is allowing the sights to dictate the pace. In other words, right? Because the gun's got to settle, and you need to see that things are aligned again. But then that trigger finger is prepped and ready to, as soon as that, that's the determining factor, is that gun getting settled and back on target.
Well, if the sights aren't on the target, is the muzzle on the target or not?
Yeah. Well, you don't know.
I check the sights and the muzzle have some relationship to one another. So,
that's right.
Your sights have got to be back on the target. And let me be real clear here. It's nothing wrong with moving the trigger before the sights are absolutely stable on the target. It's just that the trigger should not break until the sights are stable on the target. And again, we talked precision earlier. How precise do you need to be? Do you need to be all the shots in the same hole, or do you need to be all the shots in an 8-inch circle? Or, 4-inch circle, or a 10-inch square, or, whatever the target may be.
Yep.
So as long as the sights are on the target and you've got an acceptable sight picture to do what you want to, the shot can break and you keep on going.
That's right. And we do have a question that came in from, or really a request from a viewer here, Mark. He asks here tips on proper trigger finger placement and tips to prevent the gun from moving during the trigger press.
Easy day. Mark, thank you for that. That I've been trying to figure out a way to get this in, so you've been able to facilitate that. The fact that all of us are built a little different means that trigger finger placement can vary from individual to individual. I'm big on fitting the gun to the hand of the shooter, but we don't always have that choice. In the law enforcement community, sometimes it's one size fits all, and we don't care what size your hand is. So we have to look at what the objective is, and the objective is to be able to move the trigger through the stroke to release the shot without moving the sights or disturbing the sight alignment per se. And one of the things that I learned, 50 years ago, I guess, And I didn't really understand it at the time, but I knew that it worked. Now I understand why. But the bottom line is you need to be able to pull the trigger without moving the front sight out of the rear sight notch. And a good way to do that is to look very hard at and see the front sight. Envision in your mind that there is a connection or a linkage between the trigger and the front sight. And as you pull the trigger, in your mind, you're pulling that front sight centered in the rear sight notch. So it's like the front sight is on a rail, and as you're pulling that trigger, you're pulling the front sight straight back through the rear sight notch. And that mental perspective will cause you to follow that front sight with your trigger movement, and you won't end up pushing the front sight left, right, or otherwise. So, when somebody tells you, use the tip of your finger or the first joint or whatever, that's all a good place to start. But wherever your finger rests on the trigger to allow you to pull the front sight through the rear sight notch to the point that the shot is released, the hammer is released, the striker is released, that's what you want to be able to do. Mm-hmm. And it goes right back to the wall drill again. And incidentally, we didn't talk about speed with the wall drill, but you should do that slowly at first, just to make sure that you've got good control over the trigger movement. But after that, you should be able to just literally make it happen instantly. Something that, if you looked at my YouTube videos, particularly in the military end of things, had something called the now drill. Larry Vickers calls it command detonation, I think, and yep. Some of the other trainers call it all kinds of different things. But the bottom line is when the buzzer goes off, the whistle blows, or the signal is given, you immediately make the gun go off. But you want to make it go off from a precision standpoint. You don't just jerk the trigger.
Yep.
So you move the trigger very quickly, but you move it precisely so that you don't move the front sight or the muzzle off the target. Mm-hmm. So to come back to your question is put your finger on the trigger, look very hard at the front sight, and move that trigger while making sure that the front sight is in the rear sight notch, and envision a connection between the two until the gun discharges. And you'll find that you've got just tremendous results with that.
Mm. Well, clearly your impact on Sig Academy and the culture and the legacy that you've left there is still present, because I've heard that exact example you just gave about pulling the front sight through the rear sight from, I don't remember which instructor it was, but I know I've heard that very same thing at the Academy just in the last few years.
Yeah, well, that's, I developed something called the SIG principle. Mm-hmm. And,
simple is good.
Yeah, simple is good. It's a 25% improvement over the KISS principle because we eliminated one of the letters. Well, I mean, it's true, right?
Yep.
So one of the things, and to go back to, the base and the legacy and all that kind of good stuff. Years ago, when I was a youngster trying to learn how to shoot, and just trying to soak up everything I could, a lot of the people that I listened to, the firearms instructors and all that, made it so difficult. It was such a long and involved process, to deliver one shot. Hell, I'd go to sleep in the middle of the presentation. It was so long sometimes. So the bottom line is I'm a professionally speaking, I'm a student of adult learning. How do you transfer information in the most efficient and economical and safe way? So we all learn ABC 1, 2, 3. That means we can realize 2 to 3 bits of information at a pop, and anytime we add more to that, it it tends to displace some of the things that were important that you needed to know. So I looked at it from the standpoint of how do we do this? And so we started to teach whatever we taught in steps of 3, preferably, and let's take the draw as an example. We started with access. That means, put your hand on the gun, release the retention straps or whatever it is, you get your shooting grip. Withdraw is to get the gun out of the holster, and I like to bring it straight up as high as we can and then rotate the wrist forward. The reason being is because as soon as the muzzle is pointing at the target, we can put our finger on the trigger. If the gun is straight up and then straight out, we literally can shoot in a compressed type situation or not, our choice. Whereas if we are, moving at an angle, that makes it different. And of course, the third part of the equation is drive. And, you literally drive the gun just like you were going to punch somebody with your fist. You drive the gun towards the target, your fingers on the trigger, and you're pulling the trigger as the gun is moving towards the target. And at full extension or pretty close, gun goes bang. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really can't do it any quicker than that. Or if you can, I don't know how, but, you know. So
simple is good.
Yeah, simple is good. ABC 1, 2, 3. Yep. So everything we do is, point gun at target, pull trigger, hit target.
Yep. And everything else is just a refinement of that.
Yeah,
right?
I say everything else is fender skirts, curb feelers, and whip antennas. Nice to have, but not necessary. So.
Yeah. That's great. This is good stuff. And I know that the viewers and listeners are enjoying it, George, with the comments and things that are coming in. And I'm really looking forward to us getting back together again in about a week for the Guardian Nation Live event.
Yeah.
Where we can build upon some of these even further.
We can talk about that. And, one of the things that Matthew and I talked about was we need to expand our base meaning fellow shooters, in this country. And, just simple things, get more people involved. And if we can make shooting simple, the mechanics of it simple, it will make it easier for people to get involved, because so many people think that this is difficult and, oh my God, it's hard to do. And, you've got to practice for 30 years in order to be able to hit anything and all that. And I mean, literally in less than an hour, I can turn you into a shooter, not a tactician, but a shooter as good as 99% of the police officers in the country today. Mm-hmm. Really easy stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. I mean, it's if we want the Second Amendment to survive, especially so, we got to keep bringing the people in, because what we've seen culturally over the last century is such a deviation. I mean, where guns were a part of everyday life, a part of the culture. It was because it was a part of life. And as we've become more industrialized, more technologized, that's become less and less of a necessity, and thus, by nature, we lose that identity and we lose that culture, and before we know it, we might lose those rights too.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, in memory and in honor of your wife with the Linda Harris Scholarship. I know you guys did a big announcement about that last year at the expo. I don't know if you were planning on being the expo again this year. That, of course, is now canceled.
Yeah, we actually have selected the second recipient, and I'm not really sure what we're going to do. With it. Beth Grote was the first, and she's done a lot. I actually had her come and train directly with me for just for a few days. And, she's taken that back. She lives in the Cincinnati area, and she's taken that back to, her home range and the gun shop that she works with. And and she's taken some other courses with the USCCA folks, and she is a real star. As a matter of fact, she started to write for the magazine now. So, um, that's we need women in leadership positions that can take the ball and run with it, and she's one of them.
Yeah, this is not just a men's sport or community, and I agree that is something. I think that's something that's been lost as well. Because I mean, if you look even historically, geez, go back to Annie Oakley. I mean, women have been involved with guns for a long time.
Let me let you in on a little secret.
Hmm.
So, I think I told you earlier that we went from a cost center to a profit center at the Sig Academy, and at that point in time, it was costing me $4,000 every day just to break the lock on the gate. So I had to generate some revenue. And I looked at women, my grandmother was the woman that got me started in shooting, at the ripe old age of 3. So, I started with woman's influence. My wife was a world-class shooter. She had actually used a gun twice in the defense of her honor. And, she was a hunter, on and on. I mean, she was the total package. So when I asked her about what she thought about bringing women into the academy, she says, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "Okay, go ahead." She says, "Who controls the purse strings to the family?" And I said, "Well, you do." She says, "I'm a woman, right?" "Yeah." "Do you think that it's any different in anybody else's family?" "No." And all of a sudden, the light went from dim to very bright. And I realized that women control the household budget. Okay, that's disposable income. All right. So if you get the women involved in the shooting, you get them interested in buying guns and shooting sports. Guess who else buys guns and shooting and participates in shooting sports along with it? The kids and the old man and everybody else, her friends. And all of a sudden we realized that women run the show, particularly when it involves disposable income. And I got to tell you, we started doing women's only classes, and they were a hit. They still are today. And, Mrs. Harris was right.
Yeah.
Women do run the show when it comes to the purse strings. So success, now you know.
There you go. Well, I've enjoyed this chat with you today, George, and I really appreciate you being on the podcast with me today.
Glad to do it anytime. And, thank everybody for listening. I appreciate it. Take a friend to the range, and remember, muzzle management and trigger finger discipline will give you both safety and success.
Yeah, that's a great place to end it as well.
Okay.
Guys and gals, don't forget, if you want to see more of and learn more from George, a perfect opportunity, and one that is, the format of the GN Live event is really, our goal with those is for them to be driven by the members, with members' comments and especially their questions. So, every one of us is in a different place on our journey as we're becoming better shooters and better self and home defenders. So, come prepared, come with your questions for George. And again, if you're not already a Guardian Nation member, well, I'd encourage you to get signed up today. Take advantage of our 14-day free trial at concealedcarry.com/14DAY. So, that is a wrap for at least this episode of the Concealed Carry podcast, and we appreciate everyone that's been a part of this, viewers, listeners, and of course our special guest George Harris of International Firearms Consultants. In fact, what's your website, George?
It's www.ifcllc.us.
Great.
And I will have to tell you, I put that up in 2011. And I have almost not changed it since, simply because I am so busy.
Yeah.
I consult in the industry with all kinds of things, and I really don't need any more business. But
good for you.
It's fun. And I tell people, I've retired 3 times. I'm like a bad dog killing chickens. I just can't quit. Um, I just love doing what I do, and I'm not going to stop. The only difference between working and doing this is I can do what I want when I want most of the time.
Good for you, man. And of course, we wish you the best. And
All right,
so,
thanks. Thanks for
with
having me.
with that, we're gonna wrap it up. And a reminder, as is tradition on this show, guys, gals, get out there and train right, train often, and train safe, so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.